Welcome to episode 15 of the Today I Am Sober podcast with your host, Liz W. Today I'm talking about the top 10 books that have helped me during my recovery. And I'm going to share with you what they are and why I love them and why I continue to read them. Now, I would love to know what books you've read that have helped you on your journey in sobriety. Many of mine are actually AA books, but there are also lots of non-AA books that have really helped me. So don't think, oh my goodness, I can only tell Liz about one particular type of book. Any genre, any book that has helped you in your recovery, let me know what it is. Now on with the show. Book number 1, Living Sober. Now, this book was written in 1975 and it's by Alcoholics Anonymous Worldwide Service. And it's the first book from AA that I ever got. And it was actually gifted to me. I rocked into a meeting in, when was it? Oh, it must have been about 2010 because my GP had said, Liz, you're an alcoholic. Of course, I decided to go to a meeting to prove her wrong. And did so quite successfully. But as I walked out, a woman thrust a copy of Living Sober into my hand. And I was like, oh God, thanks, but I'm not really one of you, I'm thinking in my head. And when I opened it, I actually realised, I think I might have a little problem because it talks about how you can basically live sober. And I'm like, well, why would I want to do that? But actually, when I eventually came into recovery through that treatment centre in 2013, it's got a really great index that explains some of the tips that you can use in your day-to-day life when you're just struggling. You know, maybe the thought of booze is all over you, maybe someone's annoyed you, you're caught in traffic, and you've just had a hell of a day, and it's like, It's a really handy little book, and it is little. It's only about 90 pages, and the index is fab. So, for example, there's a section on fending off loneliness. Now, I don't know about you, but being lonely has almost become quite normal. And even though you can be surrounded by people and you're not physically alone, you can still feel lonely. Well, that's my experience. So there's a really nice little section in there of how you can fend off loneliness. And it's about 3 pages. So that's a great book. You can buy it directly from the Alcoholics Anonymous website, or if you pop into a 12-step meeting, I'm sure you'll find one there. So that's a great book. The second book, which hopefully you've got, and if you haven't, I would strongly recommend you buy it because it's a really great book. And it's affectionately called The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's actually just entitled Alcoholics Anonymous. And in the first 164 pages, it kind of explains what the problem is and then what the solution is. So, it helps you if you're not sure if you're an alcoholic, it's a great book to read because you'll either identify or you won't. Now, caveat, it was written in the 1930s. It was written by a man, Bill Wilson, one of the founders of AA. And bits of it are, shall we just say, dated. And the feminist in me is kind of shrieking. And there's a section, one of the chapters in here is, what's it called? It's called Two Wives. And it was written by Bill W. And some of it, quite honestly, is a tad patronising and doesn't work in the 21st century. But if you can get over the fact that it's quite dated, some of the things in there are, quite frankly, misogynistic. It is a phenomenal book. And reading that book and sitting down with a sponsor and going through that book is what I attribute to saving my life, because it enabled me to change. So I would strongly recommend, if you haven't got it, to buy that book. Now, another good book is called A Program for You, and it's a guide to the big books Design for Living. and it refers to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's by Hazelden. I'll make sure the links for all of these books are in here. And what I really like about this is it tells you how to actually use the book, the Big Book of AA. Now, I would strongly recommend, and this is from personal experience only, that if you want to work through the Big Book of AA, get yourself a sponsor, someone who's marching this road with you shoulder to shoulder, who is comfortable with the Big Book, who understands it, and it will help guide you through it. But sometimes, I don't know about you, I like to learn things by myself. So actually, this book, A Program for You, I think is actually really good. And it kind of talks about some of the challenges with the Big Book being written so long ago. So again, if you want to kind of study the Big Book of AA, love that book. Right, what's next on my list? I've talked about this one before. This is book number 4, Depressive Illness, The Curse of the Strong by Dr. Tim Cantifer. Tim Cantifer was the psychiatrist I'd met in 2007 and finally in 2013. Originally because I thought I was depressed. Turns out I'm a raving alcoholic. But thank God for that man. I now don't put, he told me what the problem was. He gave me a solution, which for me was going into rehab and working a 12-step program. But, mental health problems are part of my story, particularly depression and anxiety. So if you're struggling with depression, it's a really great little read, and it's also really good to give to your family members. I actually got my husband to read it, and it's really helpful because it's got some great tips in there about how you can be supported by yourself, but also how your family can support you. So that's Depressive Illness, The Curse of the Strong. Okay, now we're going to move on to a book that is not a recovery book. So book number 5 is called Now Discover Your Strengths by Marcus Buckingham and Donald Clifton. Now, I absolutely adore this book. And the reason is it helps you understand what you're great at. And I don't know about you, but when I got sober, I started to question myself and question my abilities. And I started to feel like I wasn't very good at anything anymore, and that almost like my alcoholism defined me. And what this book has allowed me to do is to really see what I'm great at. So if you're struggling to see what you're great at, what are you really brilliant at, what are your core strengths, get this book. I think it's still in print. It also comes with a Gallup survey that allows you to find out what your strengths are. And I love it because I now know, I now have a vocabulary for saying what I'm good at. And it's served me so well in many areas of my life. Because, when if I've been talking with managers about my professional development at work, it's given me a language to talk about what I'm really good at. So I highly recommend that book. Okay, what's next? Now this is a New York Times bestseller, and if you haven't heard of this, I would be gobsmacked. It's called The Gifts of Imperfection, and it's by the wonderful Brené Brown, and it's subtitled Let Go of Who You Think You're Supposed to Be and Embrace Who You Are. Now, I love Brené Brown on so many levels. If she could be my best friend, my God, I just simply adore the woman. I think she is phenomenal. And in this, she talks about vulnerability, courage, worthiness, and shame, and how you can live a wholehearted life. Now, the thing for me was that when I first got sober, I had an awful lot of shame about the fact that I turned into an alcoholic, or that I am an alcoholic. And yes, through working a 12-step program, I lost a lot of that shame, but it still reared its head in really quite unusual ways. So this book has proved really helpful. Also, I'm a perfectionist, and honestly, I can beat myself up for not doing, and the simplest thing perfectly. So I'd highly recommend this book if you are a perfectionist too. Since I read this, Brene has also gone on. There's a Netflix event that's screened. There's also her TED Talks, and if you're not familiar with her TED Talks, go and check them out. They are phenomenal. Right, what's next? So this is book number 7. So this is by Ruby Wax, and it's called How to Be Human, the Manual. Now, my mother-in-law bought me this book for Christmas a couple of years ago, and I'm like, are you trying to tell me something, that I need to learn how to be human? And she wasn't. She's an incredibly kind woman, and she knows that I struggle with my mental health. And of course, Ruby Wax also struggles with her mental health, and she's written about it. And I really like the fact that she calls it a manual. And it's quite, how can I phrase it? It's quite intellectual in terms of, and it's not that intellectual, that's probably the wrong word. It's very robust in its scientific kind of base. But there's a really good section in there on addiction. It's actually page 143. I'm leafing through to it now. And you may be thinking, why aren't you reading sections of this book? Well, actually, for copyright reasons, you can't, because obviously it's her copyright. But I would strongly suggest you reading it, because she's really funny. And on page 147, she talks about how to get over addictions. And she said, what can you do about it? And she talks about AA, NA. All the A's are a brilliant answer to addictions and help millions of people. And she goes on to then have this mad conversation with a neuroscientist. But, one of the things I've learned in my sobriety is that I have to seek outside help. Just staying in AA meetings in an AA club hasn't enabled me to live a full and rich life. So I do look for alternative books to kind of challenge me and question me. Right, what's next? This is what I got given in treatment. And when I got given this book, I got really angry. And ironically, the book is called You Can't Make Me Angry, and it's by Dr. Paul O. And it claims on the back that by the time you put this book down, you will be convinced that people and circumstances don't make us angry. We make ourselves angry. People can't make us feel angry unless we let them. We alone are responsible for our feelings. And it goes on to talk. It talks about emotional serenity. And it's a really great book if you are working a 12-step program, because it's very much about the 12 steps, or it kind of mentions the 12 steps and, meetings and all that good stuff. But if you get really angry, it's a brilliant read. And through reading it, I actually learned that no one else can make me angry, only I can make me angry. And I have a choice in how I respond to situations. So that was book number 8. Right, book number 9 is, now this is a business book, and it's by Denise Duffield Thomas. It's called Chillpreneur. And it was released in 2019, and I got it when it came out. And its subtitle is The New Rules for Creating Success, Freedom and Abundance on Your Terms. And what I loved about it is there's one key thing that I've taken away from this, And that is how you can have a keyless life. And I don't know if you've ever had a car where you don't actually need to put the key in the lock to open the car. I had one of those once. It was a really lovely car. And I could have my key in my handbag and I could walk up to the driver's side and the door would open. So, you know, it was truly keyless. And then when I got in the car, I didn't even have to take my key out of my handbag and find it. I could just press a button on the dashboard, and provided my handbag was in the front of the car would start. A great example of something that's keyless. And she uses that analogy in the book to talk about how in our life, there are things that we can do to make effectively our life keyless. So one of the things I used to do when I used to travel for work is that I had a suitcase with a separate toiletry bag that had all of my toiletries in it just for traveling. So, you know, small deodorant, face wipes, toothbrush, toothpaste, all the accoutrements that you have in your toiletry bag. And I had a second makeup bag. So all of the usual makeup products that I would have, obviously quite simple, so I wouldn't have every single lotion and potion duplicated, but I had a separate makeup bag that had the core components for me to make my face look good for a couple of days. And that was always in my suitcase with my toiletry bag. And then I would always make sure that it had those blinking plugs that I always seem to have to buy at airports. Because, you know, when you're traveling, the 3-pin plugs over here don't work. For example, when you're in Europe, I always had, I had a couple of those. I had a spare hairdryer and I had a second set of hair straighteners. So what that meant is every single time I travelled, I would simply open up this little suitcase and I wouldn't even have to think, have I got my toothbrush? Have I got my toothpaste? I would simply have to put my clothes in. I even got to the point where I had a separate set of pyjamas simply for travelling, and I would have a separate set of Birkenstock sandals so that I could wear those in the hotel room like slippers, because it was about making your life easy. And I think one of the things I've learned is, you know, we have so many decisions we have to make on a daily basis. Where in our life can we make it keyless? Do you know what I mean? Really easy. And that's what one of the key takeaway I got from Denise's book is, what ways can I make my life as simple as possible? So if you're in business and you work for yourself, it's also a great book about entrepreneurialism as well. Book number 10 is also another AA book, and it's called Daily Reflections. You can get this in most meetings. My copy I got on the 13th of the 10th, 2013. And it's a really lovely little book that is almost like a little mini meditation that you can do with yourself. So let's go to today's. At the time of recording this, it's December the 19th. So what's it say for today, December the 19th? Understanding the malady. When dealing with an alcoholic, there may be a natural annoyance that a man could be so weak, stupid, and irresponsible. Even when you understand the malady better, you may feel this feeling rising. And that's from Alcoholics Anonymous, page 139. And each of the little quotes is typically from AA text. And then it talks a little bit about the quote. And what I do is I actually read this book every single day, but I don't read the physical book. I have an app on my phone that has exactly the same content. And I read it and I think about it and I have a little prayer about it. And every day it just allows me to kind of get centered and think about where I'm at. So it's a phenomenal book to use every single day to kind of help you remain focused on what you're trying to achieve, which is being happy, joyous, and free. So those are my 10 favourite books that have helped me enormously during my recovery. There's a ton of others. Most of them are on my Kindle, and I don't actually have physical copies of them. But if you've been reading a book that has really helped you during your recovery, I'd love to know what it is. I'm always on the lookout for new books. So I hope that list has been helpful. And if you've got some Amazon vouchers, you can always go and treat yourself. Have a fabulous day. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Today I Am Sober podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love your feedback. So come and find me on social media. All of the links are in the show notes. Until next time, bye.